Well, we feed them manure, but you could feed them anything, and they'll even eat organics. Let's say you had compost or some excess of compost or things similar to that, right? Then they will eat that. How soluble or how soft or how processable, right? The food is the faster they'll eat it. So if you're giving them really hard stuff that's really dense or hard to eat, they're not going to eat it as fast, okay? But they still will eat it. But if you're giving them easier to digest foods, right? Fresher digestible foods. Composting worms are actually for eating what's called vegetable mold. So vegetable mold means on the top layer of our forest, the leaves fall down, and at the top layer they start to kind of rot, and that's kind of rotteny. Or for instance, if we have our compost bucket and it starts to like very quickly go funky, that's described as vegetable mold, and they like to eat that. Okay. So sometimes though, our compost bucket has too much water in the food. So if we put it in, it'll be so watery, can be over the 75%, right? And it'll start to rot too fast, and you could get flies and stinky. So then people with small worm bins inside of people's houses, that can start to stink. Even though they're not putting manures, the compost bucket can get funky, right? Very quickly. So they'll add in newspaper, which they describe as carbon, because the worms like carbon. And that also helps to suck up moisture, to balance their moisture level, to get their moisture level down. A lot of instances, to keep it from smelling, they put in so much, say, newspaper, that the moisture level is lower than what is probably optimal. But that's because people don't want it to stink. What's interesting about manure is that though we might want to believe it stinks, because our poo stinks to us, but cow poo doesn't really smell bad. And so at this level, there's no smell. I'm not smelling anything. But if I was to put like my food scraps in here from the kitchen, and here's what happens. People, it's hard to tell how many worms are in there. And worms can eat their weight per day. But exactly how much of your food scraps equal the weight of the worms? So if it's your own personal bin, and you're really attuned and you're working with your bin, you know how many food scraps should be, and you're watching it, so the next day you don't dump on more. What happened here in the past, sometimes people would want to dump the compost, and we make quite a bit of compost, and then they would dump it on here. And the worms couldn't eat it fast enough. And the next day they dump more on it. And then it rotted, and you get flies and stinky and stuff. So I find it easier, and we'll show you that instead of trying to feed, which you can, our food scraps to the worms, but then that makes like extra work for me to have to worry about, or it can get smell, and I don't like flies. So I'd rather feed the manure. It's much easier. And then I'll show you what we do with our food scraps. So whether we put our food scraps in our compost, which I showed you, but that's not what I do. I showed you that on our composting because you may find that a valid technique in your home country. That might be a way. But say permaculture can become more advanced. We can develop systems. We can take on this permaculture systems cycling mentality. So at that point, I might decide that I want to take my food scraps and I want to anaerobically digest them. Remember we described the anaerobic digestion? So after this, I'm going to be teaching you about basically biofertilizer, how to make water-soluble fertilizers. And the interesting part is I want to use the water-soluble fertilizers. They're super good. But they also are so aggressive, they can break minerals down. So they can help me to re-mineralize my soils. Okay? In that instance, because they're so aggressive and I have that system set up, I can take the food scraps from the kitchen and pour into the anaerobic digester, feeding those microbes so that they're active to eat the rock dust, because I add rock dust. And then they'll eat that. They're active, that they don't want to die like any other organism. So then they'll eat the rock dust and convert that to water-soluble minerals. So then my water-soluble minerals are now in that container, which is also attached to the ICB, diluted and pumped into the garden. So then I'm mineralizing my garden with minerals from rocks, and I'm actually giving it the NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium generated. And I do say little to no work, guys. So honestly, I did have it set up before. I had sprinklers in here, you can see. I had sprinklers under here. Deer came to live with us. A family member needs to have a job, right? And so I stopped automatically doing the nursery because she takes care of it. And she actually takes care of it better than if I had it sprinkling, okay? But the sprinkle gave me like that 80% without doing anything. Deer does better than 80% because she's taking care of the plants more. So I stopped doing the sprinkling here, and I'll show you. I just bypassed it and pushed more to our gardens. But you can automate permaculture. You can automate your gardening. It's not very difficult. We'll show you more on how to do that when what we call permaponics, right? So permaponics is an automated organic gardening system. I'm happy with the input that I put in for the output. I find it to be okay. Once a month, I have to take 2 sacks of manure. I take 2 sacks of manure and I spread it over 10 bins. I come back 1 month later after they've been watered, because they get watered as we water our seedlings for our gardening, right? And I come back and I take out, 20 kilos of worm castings. Sweet. At the same time, every day, the leachate goes to the garden. Really nice. And then I make these products that I can utilize in our garden. I can share it with my friends, and I can keep for next year. So I'm making that product that I can utilize in my orchard next year, which makes a really great value, because I can almost increase the production rate of my mango trees if I do nothing to my mango tree, meaning I give it no fertilization. One of our nice mango trees make about 800 1-kilo mangoes. If I increase the fertilization by doing organic techniques with manure and worm castings, and also the calcium that we're adding, I can get it to about 1,000 mangoes. That's a 20% increase of production of mangoes. And that then is worth more than, say, this to me, because then we can sell the mangoes on the market. So this is the type of thing you have to figure out. What's your business? What is your business? Yeah, and that's a real thing to figure that out in life. What is it? I'm a farmer. I farm the sun. How do I sell the sun? I sell world-class mangoes. And people are willing to pay me well for a really nice 1-kilo beautiful mango. Okay, that's my business. But it may look like my business is mangoes. Man, that all started with manure. My business is manure. I buy manure and I convert manure to mangoes through systems. I get my money from selling mangoes, but without the manure, I'm not going to have good mangoes. And this is the question that we need to get to. How are we going to get our money? What are we going to sell? What's the resource that went into converting it in our permaculture process to our thing? So our permaculture farm is my factory. I need inputs to my factory. What does my factory make? Okay? This could be your factory. If you sell organic orchid food in Europe or the US online, you're going to do well, guys. So you turn nothing into good stuff for people that are going to be happy to pay for it because you have a good product. In Thailand, they have a worm that I'm sure there's a scientific name for it. But anyway, I got some and I've introduced them to our farm. But they're actually what is an earthworm, or a burrowing earthworm. And I call them affectionately megaworms, because one of the megaworms is the size of your finger. And when it's not stretched out, but normally, so like if that worm is that big, megaworm is this big. The reason I wanted to introduce them is because they're a large, deep burrower. They can go down almost, in some instances, 2 meters maybe. And so that their burrows allow more water infiltration. Roots will can follow a wormhole, so it makes it easier for the trees, water infiltration, and air. So these are the things we need to have our good soils. So it's just that they're native, so I bred them for a while, then you reintroduce them. This season they bred on their own, which was nice to see. So that means that, okay, they have a nice environment. We haven't done, we're doing permaculture, it's organic, so it's been more than 5 years. So there's no toxicity in our soils anymore from the past, when we bought the farm from the previous farmer. So yeah, in that instance, the worms now can do really well. When people spray chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides onto their soils, those things do increase the yields for their, let's say, plant. But inversely, it kills the soil, okay? And then the soil fauna and food web gets damaged. So it's like a catch-22, and then they end up going down like a slippery slope of, okay, since I've damaged the soil and the soil's not providing the nutrients, I have to put more nutrients artificially. And then the more artificial I put, the more it damages the soil, and then I have to put more. Till finally, there's no soil life, and then the plant only lives artificially, okay? So if you stop that, you can kind of bring the regime back. And what's nice is that you can go to it's certified organic soils after the worst chemical usage there is, okay? After 5 years of not doing that, the soil will recover, and it will then be certified. The Amish are very good at this in the U.S. So corn farmers doing commercialized, tractor-based chemical agriculture will eventually stop and they're not making enough money on the farm, it's not worth it to them, and they'll sell it. And the Amish have an issue where they have a child, that boy gets married, he needs to have his own farm, and his dad is farming his farm, and the size for that person, so he needs a farm. So the community will get together, and they'll as a community, their church, buy the farm, like loan the money basically, and then the new son and wife goes to make that farm, and they buy a chemical agriculture farm, non-Amish farm, okay, unless they had inherited one or something, but okay. And in that instance, the Amish then support those people, one through the communal financing, and then the other, they give them manures. So they'll locally, like, I'll give you so much manure from all of the people, and they bring that and they start to apply manures back to the soil, and then they obviously farm with horses and no chemicals. And it takes 5 years for that farm to go from what I would describe as played out, meaning no life in the soil, back to life in the soil, and then that the yields of that farm is the same per acre or per square meter as an Amish farm that has never had chemicals. Organic is entire, from they cut down the forest to organic. The yields are the same after only 5 years. So the community supports that farmer for that 5-year period so his yields come up through organic and mostly just applying manures. So they take the animal manure, they put the animal manure on, 5 years later, all the life returns, and boom, the yields are organically up at hundreds of year old farm that's organic. So that's how fast or powerful. So that, and you go to your farm, same thing at the beginning, maybe it'll not be that great, but over time, and you keep adding in your correct things to help the soil, and if you help the soil, eventually you'll get really good returns. So that's what we're doing. So that's a great yield. So that's it. We're going to move this over, and then I'll show you now how to take out. So assume that here's a good, hey guys, here's a good example of like, okay, we're going to make potting mix later, but we end up putting castings in our potting mix, and then the worms hatch and then live inside of the potting mix. So here is this is a tamarind tree, and if I kind of look up in there, do you see this? Well, that's castings. So that means there's a worm living somewhere up on top of this board and eating and making castings. Okay, so we have to see where there he is.
Oh.
So the worm.
He's made all those castings.
Those, I think there was a bigger one. He might have tried to get back there.
Oh yeah, hello. He's coming out.
He's living in the bag.
Oh, naughty.
And then he went out, and he's coming back in the bag. So if we take this bag, right, and then we look on top, there's not that many castings, so he's kind of coming living in here and going out the bottom. But if we look at like this one, you can see there's a little bit more castings, indication there's worms living in the bag.
What about these ones?
Yeah, so that's a worm has come out, and they're living and making castings and then converting it. And then this is moringa, that guy, and a few other babies, okay, hatched from the eggs that were in the castings. They'd come in, they consume the compost that we're going to add to our potting mix. They live. So the soil cycle is now going, and it's a really good indication to see that they do not eat the plant roots. So he's not in there eating the roots, okay? He's eating the compost, converting it to a water-soluble state. Then the plant can take up that easier. So really good one. Now this particular moringa needs to get moved to the garden, because you see how it's kind of like going, it's really long, and then it's going all over, right? Because it's looking for sun. It's not enough sun in here. So then that's it needs to go outside, get sun. So that's fine. So I can just take him, repot him up. So I put it back. Didn't hurt anything. And if I want, there we go. We'll get some more potting mix when I do our seedlings over there. And then, yeah, okay, cool. I need to take those moringas and move them outside. Once they find the sun, they'll go back up straight, okay? There's different kind of worms, so you can get bigger worms. Some people utilize them. These are native worms, so this is the size for our property, because I like to put them back in, or we're reintroducing them. So if we breed the native worms, then that's good for the native populations. Versus if I could get bigger worms, I could even get night crawlers that people have brought in. But we have to be careful about that invasive What's invasive, and and Guy will talk to you more about it. If we release worms from one continent to another, they can change the flora and fauna responds to the worms. So you actually can get to where the plants change in response to the type of worm. And so then what is the consequences of that by changing the soil food web? So for me, I don't know, and it's like that GMO thing. I don't like that kind of concept. I don't want to do something, so I'm going to we do well with native worms. They're big enough. We make lots of castings. So, but that's why people get into that money aspect. Oh, if I had bigger worms, I could make a worm farm and make more money. Then a lot of fishing is like that. People sell worms in fishing. They want big worms. Then the guy goes fishing. He goes home. Oh, I got a few left. I'll let them go. He throws them into the bushes, right? Trying to be nice to the worm. But then that worm can then breed and change that areas because it outcompetes like the native worm. So one of those things, humans have been changing our ecosystem as long as we've been in it. So.
He's living in the wheelbarrow.
Well, temporarily.
Oh my god.
Doing the roll over
Big
bit.
one. Holiday home. What are you doing?
Anyway, the front of him got cut off, but then he'll still live.
Different type?
No, he's just a big worm. Breeder. And yeah, that was probably sitting on the ground. So put him in there. He'll be okay. All right. Just worms everywhere. So that's good.